What's up, everybody? Welcome to the TrineDay Studio Sessions podcast, episode number 2. My name is Scott Armstrong here with Rebunk News, and I'm very excited to be back with you today. Of course, we are discussing the fantastic book, Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible. We have both authors here today, and I'm so excited to get into it with you guys. It's just truly an honor to be a part of this project. I'm going to say hello to Chris Milligan, the owner of TrineDay Publishing, real quick. The boss, the man in the co-pilot seat here. Chris, how's it going?
Well, it's getting hot out here, but I really appreciate everybody giving us some time and coming on. And thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody, for attending.
Absolutely. Well, what I thought we would do this time is we'd actually, because we have another esteemed panel of experts on the material that we're going to be discussing today. And I wanted to briefly, before we dive into the subject matter, just go around real quick, allow each person to introduce themselves so that you can kind of get a feel of where we're at. And then we're going to go deep. You guys ready? So first, I want to kick it over to first co-author, Dr. Jim MacGregor. Jim, how are you doing?
Hi, Scott. Thank you. Yeah, I'm doing fine, thanks. It's been very warm here in Scotland for a few days, but it's bucketing down rain today. But it's much more pleasant actually. Yeah, I was working on this book for a few years, and we have with a few earlier books with a previous co-author, Jerry Doherty, and we've now come to this book. So I'll be very interested to hear what your panelists think about it tonight. But it's nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim. And we also are so grateful to have the other co-host with us today, Dr. John O'Dowd. John, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I've been enjoying the heat, or suffering the heat, a bit of both. And like Jim, it's been raining here too. We live a good few miles apart. So I'm the other co-author, and it's an honor and privilege to be co-author and to be here with you tonight.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
This afternoon or this morning.
Yeah, wherever we're at. We're all in different time zones all over the world, and it's cool that we can come together and discuss these important topics. So we have a couple new folks joining us this time. So I'm going to kick it over to Terry Boardman. Terry, how are you doing?
Hi, fine, thank you. I'm speaking to you from southwest of Birmingham in England in the West Midlands. Very happy to have been involved with this project on the editing side, and to have met Jim. Haven't met John yet. Hi, John. Good to see
Hi,
you.
Terry. I've heard a lot about you.
Thank you, and I've been interested
in work on the book.
Thank you. I've been interested in the subject since the 80s, I guess, particularly, beginning with the First World War. And then in the late 90s, I wrote my first book on related subjects, which is called Mapping the Millennium Behind the Plans of the New World Order. And then a couple of years ago, I wrote Western Hostility to Russia, Hidden Background to the War in Ukraine. So that's the situation back then, 100 years ago, connecting it to the situation today. So this has really been my main focus. So it's been wonderful to be involved with the book like Jim and John have done. I read Jim's earlier books on the First World War with Jerry Doherty, and that's where I first noticed him. So I'm really happy to be involved with this one as well.
Awesome.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. We're grateful to have you here for sure. And then Peter Hoff is joining us as well. Peter, how are you?
I'm good. I'm here on Southern California, halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego, about a couple of 4 miles from the ocean front. And my book is The Two Edwards. And I'm happy to be here with this discussion. Two World Wars and Hitler. I see that on the very first page, the book starts out with reciting the Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles, which is probably the most egregious, horrendous lie that I have ever heard of in my entire life, and it's here on the first page. So I'm happy to engage in this discussion.
Awesome. Well, we are very grateful to have you here. I'm really excited, you guys. And of course, returning champion from episode 1, Guido Preparata. Guido, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Hello to everybody. I'm here from central Italy. I've written Conjuring Hitler, and I've arrived at that book starting from the economic financial angle, starting with the Nazi finance, and eventually it mutated into the Conjuring Hitler. I'm happy to be here tonight and hearing what everybody has to say. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Guido. And of course, we have a couple folks from TrineDay Publishing. We'll go to Adam first. Adam, how are you, man? Adam Finnegan.
Good. How you doing? Yes, I'm checking in from Massachusetts. And I'm happy to be here. My expertise is not particularly on this material, but my expertise is more on in the realms of biological warfare, and there's some overlap. Especially, I wrote a book called The Sleeper Agent, and in the beginning, I talked about some of the British activities very early on. But yeah, that's about it, and I'm glad to be here.
Awesome, man. Glad to have you. And of course, the great Tim Moxley from TrineDay Publishing. Tim, how are you?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I'm just joining the group without any of the amazing experience and expertise that these gentlemen have, but as the sort of assistant editor on this, just happy to be here and learning so much as I go through both Prolonging the Agony, Jim and Jerry's first book, and then now with Two World Wars and Hitler. It's just been an amazing eye opener. And so I feel like I'm that very person to whom this book is speaking. And so I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tim. And you guys, if you're watching this, make sure that you share this content with people that you think would get value out of it. Okay. This information dies if nobody hears it. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Leaving just a thumbs up, a like, all of that stuff, and a comment really goes far to help drive the project forward. And of course, please share it with anybody you think that would get value out of it. So I think with that, I'm going to kick it over to Chris. He has another presentation for us, and then we will get down and dirty.
Again, thanks everybody for spending their time, and thank you, you esteemed people here for being here. I'm going to again start off with a bit of a slideshow here. Okay, we're going to be talking about two world wars and Hitler, who was responsible, Anglo-American money, foreign agents, and geopolitics. One of the first things that, I'm a publisher, okay? I like books. I read lots of books, okay? I've read lots of books on these subjects, but when Jim and John gave me this book and I got to look through it, I says, wow, there's really something here. And it gave me understandings that even reading all kinds of other books, it just wasn't there. And so this book is very, very important for people, okay? Especially the Anglo-American money, the foreign agents, and the geopolitics. Because basically, the British were they didn't want the Germans and the Russians to come together and control the mainland of Europe, the European landmass. Here's these two guys, like I say, two Scottish scientists take on British establishment historians. And I'm so glad about that because as you read in the book, Two World Wars and Hitler, we find that these established historians just straight lied to us. Okay. And scientists have a different way of looking at history. They're used to, being able to test things and make sure that they're correct. Where historians, a lot of times, they're just constructing it. Okay. Now, here's where I met Jim with his first co-author there, Jerry, on their book, Prolonging the Agony. Okay. And they came out with these two books, Hidden History, The Secret Origins of the First World War, by Mainstream Publishing. It was part of Random House. They came back with their second one. They wouldn't print it, so we printed it at TrineDay. We also printed Jerry's last book. It's actually a novel, but very good. Gives you, there's a lot of facts in it too, but it gives you a very good understanding of how World War II came about. And I'm here because of my daddy. He was COI, OSS, CIA, and he told me some things I didn't understand. The main thing he told me was the Vietnam War is about drugs, and there's these secret societies behind it. And communism is all a sham. It's all a big game. Now, he was branch chief head of all of East Asia Analysis Office at the CIA. Okay. And it's about, creating a narrative that we can all believe on. Okay. And, you know, uh, the my dad, when he told me those things, that led me to this guy. And one thing that when Jim and John came to me, one thing they said, we're basing this a lot of this book on three professors. Okay, we have Professor Anthony Sutton. Okay, who he wrote some books for the Hoover Institute, and they didn't want him to print them, and that led him to this book. And then he tried to uncover what was going on, and so he gets into his Wall Street books, and then a lady sent him the um, uh, membership list from Skull and Bones, and so he started writing these pamphlets and put them together in this little book. And then I got together with Anthony, and we printed it out again because his old book was going out of print. Then we also did Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, and I had the great fortune to get to meet Mr. Sutton, and he was a wonderful guy. One of the other professors that they based their book on was Carroll Quigley, an amazing guy. Was taught at Georgetown for many years. He came out with the book Tragedy and Hope, which Jim read and completely changed his understanding of World War II, and then also the Anglo-American establishment, which he didn't print until after he was dead. Okay, and there's got to be a reason for that. And the third professor that they based it on was Guido Preparata. And, he Guido ran into the buzz saw that happens out there when you try and tell the truth. And there's two of the books that he came out with, Conjuring Hitler and the incubation of Nazism, because when you really start to look at it, you find the hinky stuff out there, exposing the structures of control and power. Now, I talked about this last week. This is the basic structure of the Leviathan that the secret society system uses to rule, control the world. Okay, the top level, mining, metal, and money. Okay, and you think about it, if you control the mining that the metal comes from and the money comes from, you're in a pretty good position. And like I told last time, I had an author that could affect that. I got his book out. He was dead in 7 days, run over by a hit and run lorry in London. Okay, the middle section there. Okay, they use war. Okay, a lot in this drugs, guns, and oil. And it's a very active system. And this is what the secret societies use to get the world into shape. Okay, and the bottom level, the media, the movies / music. That's what they use to control us, because they control the media. They've got to control the movies and the music as much as they can. And then the last one is the quote unquote magic, their ability to hoodwink us, to make us think something else is happening, and their preponderance on using mass trauma, okay, to keep us in line. And you can even look at World War I and World War II as mass trauma. Okay, now on the top is a secret societal level. The next solid level is sovereign countries. Okay, and in between that, you have corporations, okay, criminal gangs, intelligence agencies. Also, you have some religious organizations here, okay, which basically, gives us, this type of crew here, okay, and the Skull and Bones is a German secret society. They're a chapter of a German secret society. So we're talking here in World War I. We got war between the great powers, but behind them you got these secret societies, and these secret societies don't give a fig about the people in these countries. Okay. I mean, they'll kill their own people just to make a point. Okay. Now we're going to have Peter Hoff here. He wrote Two Edwards, which we were honored to publish in 2008. And we're going to hear him talk about that today. And then we also have Terry Boardman, who has done a lot of research about World War One and some of the secret societies and the propaganda there, And then I started to look very hard again at two world wars and Hitler because basically Jim and John brought that to me, I believe, the end of last year, and I said great, and I worked on it very, very hard, and we got it out in about 3 months. Okay, and one of the great things about that book is at the end they have these summaries for each chapter. Okay, and because the book is a good 700 pages long. Okay. And so you read it and you think about it and you start again and you can go back and look at these summaries for each chapter. But I was looking at it and because, one thing, I was a good little boy, I went to school and read the books that they said and even did some independent study by myself on independent books. But we were lied to, okay, an awful lot about how World War One happened, okay, and in this book, actually, the first, several chapters, okay, the first one goes into talking about Carroll Quigley, and then we get into the Society of the Elect, okay, which is how World War One came about was through machinations, okay, secret machinations, and buffaloing the American and the British and a lot of the world's population. They had a secret society. They had a special relationship with the leading Wall Street organizations, which in the United States was mostly the Skull and Bones Network, which again is a chapter of a German secret society. And we get into chapter 4, chapter 5, all of these. I mean, it is such an incredible book. I just can't say enough about it. So I'm going to be quiet here and let some of our esteemed panel talk about it. And so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. Well, I would kind of like to hear first, because last time we heard from Dr. MacGregor about his insights into the book, and now that we're joined by the other author, Dr. O'Dowd, I would love to hear some of your takes on this, John. Like, tell us a little bit about what your process was with the book and how you got involved, and just give us some background on it.
Well, well, I'd long been interested in how the world really works, and I came to the same conclusion as Chris, that it doesn't work according to what we're taught in the media, in schools, and history books, and other publications. And I was particularly interested in how wars come about. It's partly to do with the fact that my father had been in the RAF during the Second World War, and a grandfather had been in the cavalry in the First World War, and both hadn't done very well out of the process. And Jim and I got together when Bush and Blair decided that they would have an illegal war in the Middle East for oil and dressed it up as a whole load of nonsense. And Jim and I started writing letters. We didn't know each other at that time. We wrote letters to our local newspaper, the Glasgow Herald, and lots of them get published. In fact, they published just about everything we wrote, and we were taking a contrary attitude to what was going down in the general population, what Blair was saying. Blair lied through his teeth. I knew he was lying. I had written to my local MP before the war, while I thought the war drums were beating. His name was Dr. John Reed, who later became Foreign Secretary and all sorts of other influential, and then became Lord Reed, having been an avowed Marxist in his youth. I got a letter back from him, which was just a whole load of lies. I knew they were lies. I knew he knew they were not lies. And I knew that something was afoot. And sure enough, it came. And then I started looking for patterns in all of this. And I came across, Jim and I got together and we started looking at these and we're looking for patterns. The thing about science is that the scientific training is not really about how you look at documents, which is what the historical training is. It's how you look at phenomena, how you look at events and things and how they plan out, and then you can form hypotheses based on how this might work. And then you can use these hypotheses as possible predictors of future events or explanations of events that you know happened. And the more we looked at it, the more I looked at it, the more it became clear that what was involved here was, in fact, a long-established plan of the British Empire, subsequently the Anglo-American Empire, basically to control the world. And it became obvious through readings of Sutton and Quigley, and particularly Preparato's wonderful book on Conjuring Hitler, a very difficult read. You have to read it several times to get it, to understand it properly, but it's got the essence of all of this here. And I knew that when we saw the Iraq war, that this was the same thing. And I know that the Ukraine war is the same thing. And I know that the coming war on Iran is the same thing. And I know that the target is eventually China, because China is the only thing that stands in the way of hegemony over Eurasia. And it all followed a pattern. And that's how I got involved with this book. And my interest was really in Jim was a master of the detail. Jim had written 2 books on the First World War and had been studying this for more than 2 decades. And I was new to it. My interest was in how academia has been misused and abused in the service of the powers, the money power. And that's how I came to it, because I had some interest in economics and I had some interests. I'd got some training in economics, and I did an MBA for that precise reason. And I got to this through looking at these things. And if you form a hypothesis as to why these events took place, and you come to the conclusion that the hypothesis was that it was about money and power and control of resources and control of populations, and it's very easy then to understand what you get a much clearer understanding of the nonsense that how, for instance, the murder of an Archduke Ferdinand can result in a whole planet, or much of the planet, going to war, certainly the whole of Europe. It's nonsense. It's patent nonsense. And you can discover how it's nonsense by looking at other sources, other details, and building a hypothesis which actually tries to explain what's really been going on underneath the garbage we're fed by the media and by history books and by the establishment in general. And that's how I got into this.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's very valuable information. I'm really appreciative of your guys' hard work and contribution towards this, because as we were taught one thing growing up, and then as we dive deeper, we realize it's not only a lie, but in a lot of cases, the exact opposite of what we were taught. So this is an exciting opportunity here that we have to really get into these topics here. We are now joined by the great Matthew Ehret. Matthew, we had went around in the beginning and kind of introduced ourselves. Do you want to give us an introduction, and maybe if you have any thoughts on what you've observed so far, maybe kick it off?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I apologize. I was stuck in traffic, so I was a little bit late. But thank you for allowing me to listen in and participate. I myself have published a few things. So I wear a few hats. One of which is the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review, which I set up in 2012, and I've written a few books on the untold history of Canada and the clash of the two Americas, and sort of my approach to coming to formulate I guess, a more realistic assessment, a more realistic hypothesis about what generated Nazism, as something which, as Chris and John were making the point, falls far outside of the the narrow cage of accepted opinions that is prevalent amongst academia and modern textbooks was through my trying to untangle what the hell is Canada. So that was sort of my awakening to the fact that the thing I was born into is much less a sovereign country and much more of a pseudo synthetic nation state. But I say synthetic because the nation of Canada itself existed and was created, brought online largely through a geopolitical maneuver in the 19th century to keep a hold of this very valuable piece of real estate by figures closely aligned with what became known as the Roundtable movement later on. Many of the leading members of the Family Compact, that was sort of the Canadian branch of the oligarchy, the carryovers of the United Empire loyalists that wanted to reject the ideals of the American Revolution and instead stay loyal to the system of hereditary power. They settled in Canada, British newly acquired British territories up here during the American Revolution and a little bit afterwards. Kind of like the same way that England provides sanctuary to Russian oligarchs who don't want to go to jail if they stay in Russia, so they go to the London on the Thames, you know? Same thing for Canada. And so you have this thing that's been sort of seeping under the surface in Canada for a long time that established a deep state structure, a privy council, lieutenant governors, an entire unelected body, very centralized, very shadowy. And I found that most political science professors were not even aware of the type of influence exerted by the Privy Council office and the various branches of the non-elected agencies that exert influence, give royal assents to law all across Canada. And so that gave me, I guess, more of a critical mind when I began to realize that there was this battle to keep control of this territory in order to prevent the emergence of the dangerous possible alliance of the USA, a Lincoln, a very different USA from the one that did Vietnam, but Lincoln's USA, which was moving towards a collaboration with Russia. And there was a big battle over who could keep a wedge and who could keep this territory locked into the system of hereditary power. And so from there, my work on Lord Milner, the Roundtable movement, the various Rhodes Scholars over multiple generations that interface with the Fabian Society became more of a clear concept as I began to unravel many of the Gordian knots of what shaped pretty much all of the domestic, cultural, scientific, foreign policy of Canada over the ensuing century. And from that vantage point, getting into a sort of retriangulation into what gave rise to the spread of fascism, you know, the Nazi movement of Quebec, of Adrien Arcand, which got great, massive support from Wall Street and, City of London banks. Oswald Mosley interfaced closely with Adrien Arcand, who was a leading Fabian himself, also a theosophist, who ran the British Union of Fascists. The Fabian Society of Canada, which was set up during the Great Depression, that later turned into the NDP party and was set up by 5 Rhodes Scholars, one of whom was a manager of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1950 and professed to create a scientific managerial solution to the Great Depression. These were all things that I was not aware of at all. And most Canadians that I would speak to, even the most educated among them, had no clue about any of this history. And I figured that, it's probably extremely important to hold on to these anomalies as I tried to paint a better picture in my mind of what were the silver shirts in the USA. What was this fascist agency that Smedley Butler exposed in 1934? What were these various fascist groups that grew out of these theosophist followers of Blavatsky, like Edward Bellamy, right, who gave us the Hitler salute in the 1880s. What is this occult thing, and how does this help me understand what was behind the growth of National Socialism and the New Templar sort of movement in Germany? So anyway, that was how I came to it. Slightly different path, kind of lateral, but that's where I'm at, and I just appreciate listening to you guys and just taking a lot of notes.
Awesome, man. Yeah, this is one of those shows where, folks, you take notes and then you have to go do some more research on your own and unpack, because I'm sure each one of these topics that we touch on is worthy of a podcast in and of itself. So thanks, Matt, for being here, dude. All right, so I want to do something here. So based on what we've heard so far, based on the conversation, the little breadcrumbs that you've picked up on so far, we have such a diverse panel of experts on any of these topics. I want to open it up. Does anybody have anything they're chomping at the bit to dive in with? And we'll go from there. Don't be shy. Unmute. Let her rip.
I do.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll go Jim, and then
Jim.
Jim, and then Peter. Yeah.
Okay.
Chris mentioned the three major books or three major academics that had a huge bearing in my understanding, and we're very fortunate to have one of them here tonight, and Professor Preparata. But I had I suppose I was a bit like everyone else. I started off believing all the mainstream history. I read all the history books on the First World War. I had a great uncle killed in that war, and my father was wounded in the Second World War, and I grew up at a hospital for war disabled people, and that's how my interest stemmed. But I'd read all the books, and I thoroughly believed the British historians, the Oxford historians in particular, that Germany had been responsible for the First World War, and Peter mentioned the Article 231 at the Versailles, which blamed Germany completely, Germany and her allies for the war. And I actually believed at the time that was absolutely correct. And for many years, I read all these different books, and then I started reading some of the American revisionist historians like Harry Elmer Barnes and Sidney B. Fay. But the big breakthrough for me personally came with Professor Quigley's book, and it was especially when I read his book Tragedy and Hope, and that's what changed my mind. And I thought maybe if it's feasible, let me just see. It might be worth giving a little taste of our book with some of the quotes that on Tragedy and Hope. First of all, on page 950, Quigley relates how he gained detailed information about this secret society that was ruling Britain at the time and took in America shortly thereafter. This is at the turn of into the 20th century. And Quigley stated, "I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected, both in the past and recently, to a few of its policies, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. The American branch of this organization, sometimes called the Eastern Establishment, has played a very significant role in the history of the United States in the last generation." Now, when I read this stuff, I was, wow, what is this guy going to be telling me in this book? And he said he studied this organization for 20 years and actually been given privy to its documents and secret correspondence and stuff for 2 years in the early 1960s. I was struggling to understand Quigley saying that he agreed with much of it and he agreed with the people. And he actually says in his book that some of the people that I now realise were some of the monsters of the early 20th century, especially in the Boer War and opening concentration camps where tens of thousands of young Boer children were starved to death. Alfred Milner, he seems to have been a big fan of Milner's. I don't know. So basically, Quigley is really, having read his books. I read Anglo-American Establishment 3 times before I really began to seriously grasp what he was saying, and Tragedy and Hope a couple of times. And to be honest, he still remains a bit of an enigma to me. What is this guy? What was he really about? What was he explaining? Why was he doing this? Why was he revealing this. And then I wondered if it was maybe something to do with this concept that where they talk about revelation of the method. I'm sure some of you have heard of this. And quickly had said, I feel that the British way of life and the British Commonwealth of Nations are among the greatest achievements of all history. Destruction of either would be a terrible disaster to mankind. But agreeing with the group on goals, I cannot agree with them on method. To be sure, I realise that some of their methods were based on nothing but good intentions and high ideals. Higher ideals than mine, perhaps, but their lack of perspective in critical moments, their failure to use intelligence and common sense, their tendency to fall back on standardised social reactions and verbal clichés in a crisis, their tendency to place power and influence into the hands chosen by friendship rather than merit, their oblivion to the consequences of their actions, their ignorance of the point of view of persons in other countries or of persons in other classes in their own country. These things, it seems to me, have brought many of the things which they and I hold dear to close to disaster. In this group were persons who might command the admiration and affection of all who know them. On the other hand, in this group are persons whose lives have been a disaster to our way of life. Unfortunately, in the long run, both in the group and in the world, the influence of the latter kind has been stronger than the influence of the former. You know, as I said, I still struggle to get my head around what Quigley was really about. Why was he spreading all this stuff? And basically, I would like to hand back to you, Scott, and hear maybe at some point in this podcast or in future podcasts what other members of the team here tonight would think of what Quigley was really about. What was this guy? What was his motive for writing these books?
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to give Peter a chance to jump in, and maybe we can expand on that in just a minute. Peter, what are your thoughts on what either you were going to say before, or your thoughts on what Jim just discussed?
Well, you know, when I read this book, Two World Wars and Hitler and Who Was Responsible, there were many things in there that I did not know, but one thing, the book did not surprise me. You know, as far as that the truth is not being told, and that egregious lies are being told and continue to be told, and that people have very little understanding of really what happened. So the book, to me, was a real eye opener. You know, the book, like I said before, it begins with citing the Treaty of Versailles, which was a lie almost impossible to define define the egregiousness of this lie. And there are many other. The beginning of World War II, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. I've got a stack of books this high that tell me exactly what Franklin Roosevelt did to induce the Japanese to attack. And even so, despite all of this evidence, this mountain of evidence, people continue to believe that on December 7, 1941, America was innocently going about its business, and Franklin Roosevelt was attending his stamp collection when, for no reason at all, out of a clear blue sky, the dirty, dastardly Japanese bushwhacked us at Pearl Harbor, and then America rose up in righteous wrath to punish the attacker. That people believe this. I think most people, the majority of people, believe that mythology, despite all of the evidence that points exactly to the contrary. And so that's why I was especially happy to read this book, The Two World Wars. There's much good information about it, and the people who are interested in history should most certainly read this book. Don't pass it up.
Don't pass it up, folks. So I'm curious, Professor Preparato, what are your thoughts on Quigley? What do you think? What was his motive in your estimation?
It's a very good question. As Jim said, I mean, this is a man who believed. In the end, I think I think what is really critical here is the religious aspect. In order for in order for the elite to push through, we have to believe that they are. I mean, we really think in devout terms. I mean, it is absolutely essential that the story of the defeat of Nazism stays as it is, because if Hitler in the story is no longer the Antichrist, I think I said this last time, then it's not so much about Hitler. It's about who defeated the dragon. And so it's the legions of God. And the legions of God are the Anglo-Americans, and the mass identifies with that. From the moment that you are giving the mass a chance or an opportunity no longer to believe that, then the whole thing goes to pieces. What happened to Quigley, I don't know, and it's a very interesting thing. I mean, Quigley believes in the establishment, but then takes this turn which is naive, right? He said they're good. What they established is perfect. The Commonwealth. Everybody imitates the Commonwealth. Hitler is trying to do it. Mussolini's trying to do it. The Japanese are trying to do it. Everybody is striving to replicate this wonderful achievement in their own country. But as Jim was saying, at a certain point, they took too many risks. And so he seems to be, he's rooting for them, but he somehow, he takes what I think is a naive viewpoint, which is motivated, I should assume, by his faith. And they said they play with fire, and they came close to something abominable. And that's him. I mean, that's he is a member of the Commonwealth struggling with his faith. These are my kings, and I cannot not think that they were not just invested by divine light, because they've gambled too much. They went too far, and that's it. It's funny. I mean, funny in quotes to see all that. But on the other hand, if we look at dispassionately and not inside this problem of personal faith and sublimated sense of belonging, to use Veblen's expression for what was a patriot who then had a moment of lucidity. For us, I mean, what the British strategist achieved was a masterpiece. And they did everything. For them, a Holocaust is no problem, and a nuclear bomb, no problem. Whatever it takes. And this isn't about money or even power anymore. I mean, Proudhon called this annexationism. It's just they want the world, and it's sophisticated. It's not just about wanting the world. I mean, you want the world and you conquer the world with your fighting masses together in some big sacralized moment. So it's not just, they're up there and there's these bastards who manipulate us and so on. Well, yes, there is, but it's more than that. And so I think that Quigley was just struggling with this reality as somebody who believed deeply and then had a moment. And so the situation is awkward. And we have got, and the book is uneven and strange in a sense, right? Masterful and so on and so forth. But it doesn't have that, that drift, militant drift. It's more like the cry of a subject who strangely has had some kind of psychological crisis and misunderstood what this was all about, and his devoutness was shaken. And so we got this strange, wonderful book that has allowed us who, as I sense, do not partake into this devout fury and are trying to look beyond, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the ultimate, as we say, red pilling, is to be able to have access to all of the hidden information that you're not allowed to know. And so you may approach it from a perspective of believing in the establishment, working for the establishment, and then realizing, oh my gosh, as I'm sure each one of us have had in our journey of truth of realizing, oh, this is not what was presented to me. So Terry Boardman, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this topic, and maybe we can use that as a segue back to the contents of the book here. Oh, you muted.
Yeah, well, maybe I could just pick up on what's just been said about Quigley. Just a couple of questions. I mean, he was there working at America's premier school of diplomacy and foreign service, right? And yet that was a Jesuit foundation. America and the English-speaking world in general, as we know, have been deeply involved for 300 years in Freemasonry. And then there's this struggle beginning in 1738 when the Pope forbade Catholics to become Freemasons between the Jesuits and the Freemasons. And we know that they often already from the 18th century onwards infiltrated each other, these two groups. And they're still doing that. And we can see some of the results since Vatican II, for example. So the one question arises is, do we know, I mean, question to you guys here now, do you know to what degree Quigley was a devout Catholic or was not a devout Catholic? One of the techniques that has been used by, and I'm just saying this descriptively, okay, not pejoratively, about the Jesuits or about the Freemasons, just trying to understand what their methods are. One of the ways that the Jesuits have been so effective over time in targeting, for example, a particular community, ethnic community, for missionarizing, is to get close to them, is to get under their skin, is not to judge them from a distance, is to really get inside the individual or the target culture you're trying to approach. And from that perspective, you could say that somebody like Quigley, who was operating from this premier position within the American establishment, American foreign policy and historical establishment, has done us all a tremendous service. I think we'd all recognize that in what he has revealed. And yet, the book, Jim and John's book, shows that, or suggests that he became afraid in the 70s, I guess, when he began to realize how far these people would go. And of course, by the time he, or before he'd written Tragedy and Hope, already John F. Kennedy had been assassinated, and then the various other assassinations that took place. And so by 1975, when he did that interview with Maxa, Rudy Maxa from the Washington Post, then he was clear that certainly these guys who he saw as the paragons of virtue on one level, and these fellow civilizational crusaders, so to speak, they were prepared to, as has just been said by Guido, they're prepared to do anything, go to any lengths, get rid of anybody. And the penny must have somehow dropped that by 1975, well, that could include me, Quigley. And so you see this kind of nervousness, this worry, this fear element, which comes into some aspects of the interview. I don't know if you guys have actually heard him speaking live. I heard a few years ago an interview he gave to, I think it was put out by Stanley Monteith on what was that, Liberty, was it, do any of you remember Liberty? Comes from California, I think. Dr. Stanley Monteith did an interview where he put out an interview with Quigley, and quite long. And the impression I got from just listening to him as a human being, Quigley, what kind of feelings came through, that he was obviously an extremely intelligent man, but there was quite a bit of egoism there, quite a bit of egoism. And you had the feeling of somebody who was quite intellectually proud, and that he'd kind of stumbled across something almost, and he felt he just had to reveal it. And at that point, I can't remember exactly when this interview was done. I think it must have been earlier in the 70s than 75, possibly a bit later. But that was the impression I got from listening to him, that it was a proud, rather egotistical, but very brilliant man, who, was somehow feeling very impatient, and that he couldn't as has been said, he couldn't stand the fact that these people had been trying to keep all of this to themselves, which, as Guido said, if we, knowing what we know about the operations of these people, does strike you as very naive. Well, I've raised a couple of questions there. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to engage with any of that, particularly the question of to what degree was Quigley a Catholic or not, or devout Catholic or not. Matt?
Well, can I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was at a Jesuit foundation at Georgetown. The Jesuit foundation in Britain is, of course, Oxford. It's in Oxford. These are no coincidences. And in fact, Guido's got a very good essay in Oliver Stone's book, at the end of Oliver Stone's book, about the Jesuits. I was brought up a Catholic. I know a bit about Catholicism and how it works. I know how it gets into your head. And I know a bit about the Jesuits because I've come across Jesuits. They regard themselves as the intellectual elite of the church. They regard themselves as the stormtroopers of the Catholic Church, a counter-reformation. They are there to correct error. And many of them are intellectually brilliant. I mean, you don't get to be a Jesuit unless you're intellectually brilliant normally. So there is this elitism about them. And it's very strange for somebody who comes from a Scottish, Irish Catholic background like mine to see the interaction between an order of the Catholic Church and the highest levels of the British state and the American state. And that's where they reside. Guido's essay mentions how the Jesuits are deeply implicated in this whole establishment thing. But I think on a personal basis with Quigley, I get the impression that Quigley was beguiled by the British establishment, by the Anglo-American establishment. He was bewitched by their, you know them, Terry. You know what they're like. They can be very charming. They're deeply deceptive. They know how people's brain works. They can get inside you, and so does the Catholic Church. That's how the Catholic Church works. So he understood the nature of how they get inside your head, and then I think he came to a moment of cognitive dissonance when he realized that what he'd been taught by them, what he had thought about them, didn't quite bear examination when you looked at what they had done and what they were willing to do. And again, his Catholic background, his Catholic conscience, if he had a formed Catholic conscience, would rebel against this, would find this repugnant. And I guess it's this interplay between his working at the highest levels of establishment in the United States and in the Jesuits, and then coming across what they were really about. It offended somehow his Catholic conscience, and he realized that at some level he had been duped. And I think that's what perhaps got him into the state of mind in which, and of course he didn't publish, the book wasn't published until after his death, because I think he had a fair idea of what would happen to him if he was still alive while it was published. That's my kind of thoughts on it anyway.
Very interesting. Hey, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something similar in that, yeah, the Anglo-American Establishment was published posthumously in 81, and he consciously didn't want that published in his lifetime. So it does indicate a certain, and when you read it, there's a different kind of vibe to how he's unfolding the story than what you get in the much more, I mean, what is Tragedy and Hope is almost 1,000 pages, much more kind of convoluted. There's little every few hundred pages you get like little bursts of very interesting things, but it's a more disjointed story, whereas the Anglo-American Establishment is written in a much more briefing, dense manner, very clear-cut facts that he's laying out, and you get the sense that he really doesn't approve of the thing he's writing about as much as he says he does in the Tragedy and Hope, which was itself endorsed by Bill Clinton after it was, which was a weird indicative thing for me. The fact that Bill Clinton went out and allowed his promotional commentary to help promote that book indicates there was value from those who represent the Rhodes Trust Network, that they wanted this kind of messaging put out there. Whether Carroll himself was aware of that effect or not, I can only imagine. However, as John pointed out, his affiliation with the Jesuit Foundation and its affiliation with Oxford leaves one, when you hold back his position as a professor of history at a school like Georgetown. I mean, you have to be vetted to have such an influential position as the professor of history that will be a gatekeeper. I mean, you're going to be a standard bearer for certain narratives, so they're not going to just let anybody occupy that type of position for as long as somebody like Quigley did. So it does strike me that he did have to pass certain tests, and it likely was the case that he was probably a Jesuit. I would say. I mean, but that being said, we can't forget that Cecil Rhodes, William Steed, one of his propaganda assistants, who was the a major media mogul of England, who ran the Pall Mall Gazette for a period, also made a point that Cecil Rhodes often pointed out that his Rhodes trust that he was setting the stage for through his manifesto, his testament, his last testament, wills, was going to be modeled was to model a new, I'm going to use my words here, but like a new church of the British Empire, a mercenary class of technocrats that could think much more long term with much more rigor, that would be modeled on the Jesuit constitution. And he was very explicit that it would be this Jesuit constitution that would model and form the foundation of the backbone of this new structure of discipline and secrecy. Cecil Rhodes himself gave over vast swaths of land of Rhodesia to the Jesuits. That's also on record. He donated massive swaths of the areas of South Africa, of Zimbabwe, to Jesuit institutions. And we know what the Jesuits were very good at doing as far as penetrating target tribal populations. Very rigorous. I mean, it's impressive the type of discipline one can get by working through the meditations by like Ignatius Loyola, and it's a bit scary, but I mean the power of imagination, of memory. We saw people like Matteo Ricci, who had an assignment to penetrate China, who wrote about his memory palace. I mean, these are very, very powerful tools that everybody has access to, but I think the oligarchy, especially through the Jesuits, want to reserve that only for an elected elite who will have the power of these tools to expand the instrument of memory through imagination. Because I mean, the idea of the past, the idea of the future, the idea of everything outside of our senses is something we access through imagination and memory, but especially imagination. And so the type of intense visualization that they have to go through as initiates, and I think throughout your whole life, of just imagining the smell, right, of your burning flesh in hell, imagining, and then going through imagining the pleasures of the sensations of being in heaven. And just that type of thing really equipped many of these Jesuit missionaries to withstand fundamentally powerful torture. I mean, and I hear records of Jesuit missionaries in North America getting roasted alive, or having their skin peeled off in Japan, and really earning the respect in a weird, messed up way of a lot of the tribal population that was killing them, because they were like, wow, this person must be holy. They must be blessed by the gods that they're not even weeping as I'm peeling their skin off their bodies, and that's just something as a point of observation. But they were very good at being able to infiltrate, to learn languages as very quickly, to utilize science, various Western discovered or developed sciences of astronomy to forecast when eclipses were going to happen, that they could use then as magical sort of tools to lord over more primitive peoples, because they must be, they must have the gift of the gods, that they can foretell the eclipse and you can't, so they must know something, and other magic tricks, right? But then they would use that to create sacred stories. So they would even, my wife's done a lot of work on the Jesuit infiltration and even creation of things like the ghost dance religion that infiltrated many of the sacred myths of the First Nations peoples of North America. And at this point, I'm not even convinced that there are any sacred myths of First Nations peoples of North America, or maybe even South America, maybe not even in Africa, I don't even know, that are untainted by these multi-generational Jesuit priests that would become sort of the replacement shamans. And it's a startling thing to see the interconnectedness of that with with the Rhodes Milner group itself. Even later on, Himmler, described how he, through his New Templar order, whatever it was, the Ahnenerbe, and the New Templar order, that he saw himself as sort of a high priest overseeing at Wewelsburg. He saw the Jesuit constitution as something that would also shape the backbone and structure of that order, and so it's always used as sort of this at sometimes right-handed, other times left-hand path. They could sometimes infiltrate Christianity to make it a, like in the Council of Trent, the Jesuits set that up to turn Christianity or the Catholic Church into this rigid behemoth that couldn't possibly negotiate with Protestants, that could only burn and destroy scorched earth, to create the perfect recipe for forever wars. Yeah, forever conflict, Chris. That's right. Yeah. And at the other hand, you got their, like I just finished reading this book by Frances Yates, The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. Very useful damn book. And this woman's really useful because she herself is a self-professed, high priest, druid priestess at Oxford. And the what is it? The Waldorf? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Not Waldorf, no. Anyway, but in it, she's going through, and I think she's correct, that the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians.
Warburg Institute.
Warburg, thank you. That was a
Warburg.
weird brain fart there. Thank you. But she makes the point, and I think she's correct, that the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians are actually the same thing, but one occupies an alchemical sort of right hand, the other one alchemical left hand path, and they play off each other. And she gives some case studies of how that could possibly work in sort of setting up the 30 Years' War as a phoenixing ritual that Michael Meyer and others had set up, that needed the sort of stiff rigidity of the Jesuit sort of takeover of the Habsburg Church or Habsburg Empire, that would create sort of such a stifling, suffocating environment that would demand a Luciferian kind of like rebelliousness, which would itself also be captured by the same forces that would do these sorts of things. And I just sort of see how that formula of the feminine, masculine sort of occult agency would they always kind of play off each other, whether it's the Fabians and the Milner group, or you got the Malta and the the Knights of Malta and the Templars, but you always kind of have that play. And so these are just thoughts that entered my mind as I was listening to you guys talking about Carroll Quigley and to what degree he was self-aware and a part of it or not. Yeah, just thoughts I wanted to throw out there.
Fascinating.
Right.
I also
Right.
have insights on any of that.
Well, the one thing that I found out, let's see here, okay, is like the guy who started the Bavarian Illuminati, he was a Jesuit. Okay, and they started to do things. Everything up till then, it mostly been Latin at the universities, and they started to do make it Greek, and then you had the situation where you had Phi Phi Beta Kappa, okay, was started December 5th, 1776 in the United States, okay? And there are Masonic scholars that say that Phi Beta Kappa was the Illuminati come to America. And then you had two shoots go off from there. One went to Yale and one went to Harvard. It started at the College of William and Mary. And then the war came along. College of William and Mary shut down, but those two shoots kept growing there at both Harvard and Yale. And you have a situation where these secret societies, they'll form sometimes in opposition to a power, or sometimes they're a power that will form their secret society to move what they're doing forward. And then, right after the Illuminati were formed, you had Protestants running around dressing up as Catholics, forming secret societies, and Catholics dressing up as Protestant, forming secret societies. Okay, again, to create the conflict. Okay, because out of the conflict, there, the old thesis, antithesis, synthesis type thing, and it's a lot of us, we want to just think about, the world here, but these elites are working in this mystical, quote unquote, magical type realm too, which they're trying to influence to continue their basic control. And so, because I've had people talk to me and says, okay, why did your daddy tell you this stuff? I mean, why did he tell me this stuff that then got me into looking at these secret societies and stuff? I always felt, well, it was because I was growing my hair long and I was smoking some pot, and my dad knew the story about how the drugs were coming in, and so I figured that's why he talked to me. And and I see it's similar things with Quigley, because you start to see, I mean, what did it take to radicalize my dad away from just going along with their story? It was it was to a certain extent his religious belief. Okay, he said he couldn't go along with that. And so I think what the people have talked here before about Quigley, I think there was this, fight within him, okay, about what he'd been raised up in and what he'd been taught, what he then saw with his eyes, and what his belief was. And it gets to the point where these secret societies, they start off a lot of time in opposition, but as time goes on, because they become aware of each other and they say, hey, our main enemy is the people, okay, because they want to continue their control over the future and the control of our children. And they also, in the externalization of the hierarchies by Alice Bailey, okay, they talk in there about all of this all coming together, and 2025 is the year of that their operation is going to be complete, okay, and we're going to be under their control.
That's it. Alice Bailey made that claim in that book. It was
Yes,
2025 is the year. Wow.
and I think that I think the people are a little bit more stiff-necked than they think and aren't as easy to control. So I'm very hopeful for the future.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Scott, that's 150 years since the founding of the Theosophical Society, right? If I just say something to in response to what was said before, I think the issue of because Quigley is so important for the book we're talking about here, Jim and John's book, and they start with Quigley, and they raise the question of Quigley, whether he was an oddball or whether he's somebody to really be trusted. So it is an important question, obviously. And I'm just thinking, we can read his words or we can listen to his voice. And as human beings, we can ask ourselves, what kind of voice is that? What kind of voice are we hearing? What kind of feelings are being expressed? And so I would say, for example, Matt, I would say, when I listen to Quigley on tape, I don't actually hear somebody who is, how could I put it? Somebody who is a self-disciplined, initiated neophyte or acolyte or Jesuit warrior or somebody like that. Somebody who's been through the kind of imaginative processes you described, and which the Jesuit priests certainly did go through. Yeah, I don't hear that from him. I hear something else. I hear rather a very clever, very intelligent academic who is proud, as somebody who's clearly been involved in the world of academia, fighting with other professors as they do, and so on and so forth, academic politics and all the rest of it. And it's a man who has that kind of nervous energy. It's not somebody who is acting out of the incredibly focused willpower that the Jesuits trained themselves in. That's just my feeling. That's why I'm asking you, how many of you have heard Quigley speak, and did you get a feeling of how he sounded?
Yeah, it's true. I've never heard him actually speak personally. I'll check it. I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, I listened to that actually a while back. It's all over YouTube. It's 1974 interview Carol Quigley. This may be the one you're talking about, may not be. Rudy Maxa for the Washington Post, and some supplemental information I just looked up said produced by Stanley Monteith.
Monteith, yeah.
So,
Right. It's
yeah.
called this right here.
Radio Liberty. Yeah, it says right here, Radio Liberty.
Radio Liberty, yeah. Secret Government, Professor Carol Quigley, Norman Dodd, and Geopolitics.
That's it. Yeah. So, I've had the chance to listen to that, and it does sound he's I hear what you're saying. He comes across as, feeling like maybe some people who are speaking dissident things nowadays might feel like I don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah. Who else has some thoughts on this? What do you guys think? Anybody can jump.
Mr. Moxley, you've been listening. What do you have to say?
Mr. Moxley. Or Adam? What do you think, Adam?
I thought it was a really great. I enjoyed listening a lot. I mean, I have Tragedy and Hope right over there, and I have the Anglo-American Establishment I've read too, and yeah, I mean the first book I think it was over 1,000 pages, and but I have never heard him speak either. I have never watched, but I would imagine that he wasn't. I would imagine based on what everybody is saying that he wasn't like he wasn't that he was I think I agree with Terry about it and being an academic like he's not so much part of their inner circle, but he was in some ways he was he was allowed to see certain things or whatever. But yeah, and I enjoyed what Guido had to say. I really enjoyed hearing Guido every time. Um, and yeah, that's about it.
Right on, man. Well, one of the things in reference to the actual book itself, I know chapters 1 and 2 is discusses Quigley, right? But then it dives deeper into some of the claims and some of the assertions and some of the topics that Quigley dives into in his work. And one of the things, like, this is a relatively new thing to me, like tracing back the origins of a lot of the stuff we see today to the Cecil Rhodes situation, right? And so I found that to be so fascinating, and it's brought up right up front prominently. And I was wondering if we can have maybe a quick discussion on that aspect, because it's how kind of the book kind of takes off and launches what then ends up happening. And even you could argue to this modern day with the Rhodes Trust, the Rhodes Scholarship. I know Matthew was talking a little bit about it, but it seems to me like that is a big piece of the puzzle that so many people don't know about. Like I said, it's new to me. I started learning about it once I started collaborating with Richard Grove. And when it first came on my radar, when I first interviewed Richard Grove a few years ago, he's known for having a book that he can just pull off the shelf and reference to any claim he makes, right? And so I'm just so fascinated. I asked him, I said, so what is your most prized possession? Like, what is your most valuable, most coveted book that you hold in the highest regard? And he pulled out he has a copy of The Last Will and Testament of Cecil Rhodes. And he said, this is the copy that, like, William T. Stead used. Like, this is Stead's copy of, I think he pulled it out on episode 1 too. So he has a very, very incredible historic artifact. And when I first heard that, I was like, I mean, Cecil Rhodes, Will and Testament, like, he's just writing about how he's leaving his house to, like, his buddy. Like, that's an important historical document. I didn't have the context to understand it, but now I do. And it seems to me like that is the root of so much of the problems that ended up unfolding. And in the book, that's kind of what led to, you know, so much of the turmoil and arguably two world wars and Hitler. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that particular aspect and the
It,
importance of
it,
it.
it, it goes further back. It goes further back than Rhodes. You have to go back to Ruskin, and then what Ruskin was doing in the latter part of the 19th century at Oxford, and how Ruskin was trying to synthesize the ruling class and in England with the emerging social movements at the end of the century. And this in turn gave rise to Fabianism and then other things. And of course, we have them entering into the Labour Party through Fabian. And the whole idea is that the highest act of God's creation is the English gentleman. And that is what they say then has to rule the world. And it's this Jesuitical drive to dominate the planet, which arises again from this deep core belief that the epitome of social evolution is the English gentleman. And that is key to understanding what subsequently happened, I think.
Okay, good to know. What are anybody else's thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would just like to maybe change direction slightly and talk about, you know, hear a bit about the British royal family and the role of the British royal family in this, because they've been deeply into a lot of this stuff for centuries and quite prominent in it. And when Queen Victoria was on the throne, I think she was on for the throne for about 60 odd years until 1901 when she died. War with Germany was unthinkable at that time because she'd a lot of German DNA in her, as do most of the royals, European royals, and she was married very happily to the German Prince and Prince Albert, and it was unthinkable. War was unthinkable then, but then she died. Her son, who was King Edward, who became King Edward the Seventh, he was something of a reprobate, and he was an obese glutton of a man, and he was crossing Paris every other weekend, visiting brothels and stuff like this, and he was very deeply in debt to the Rothschilds. He was gambling, the casinos, and Monte Carlo. He was at Longchamp racing course, and placing bets on horses that were astronomical and usually losing. And it's now well recognised that he was funded by both the Rothschilds and J.P. Morgan. And I know we have a man here who's been studied King Edward for quite a long time, and I'd really like to, if it's possible, to get Peter to say something about that.
Absolutely, Peter.
You know, everybody who's older than 65 has ideas about how to improve the world. And, you know, Cecil Rhodes, he had ideas and he had the money. And so he used the money to impose his ideas on the world. I think probably most rich people have these ideas and use their money to impose those ideas. The Rothschilds are very rich. I have no doubt that they had ideas about the world and how to improve it and how to use their money to do it. If I had $1 trillion, I would use the money to do what I think is right. I would seek a regime change in North Korea, in Cuba, and and in China, most of all China. And that's what I would do, but I don't have the money. So you don't have to worry about me. But it's not surprising to me that rich people have money and they use that money to do what they think is the right thing to do. And some that they use it to increase their own personal power. But I think when you get old enough and wise enough, you use that money for your ideal purposes to improve the humanity and the case of the world. So I'm not surprised about people like Cecil Rhodes and then the Milner Group to do what they did. They had ideas, they had the money to impose them, and they did use the money. And so nobody should be surprised by it. But it's certainly interesting to read about it, and and I do read about it, and I'll be happy to follow any future podcast here.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on the royals, the royal family aspect of it, and how that ties in?
Well, the Kaiser had a bad reputation according to Edward VII, and which he did not deserve at all. He was there when Queen Victoria was dying, and in fact, she died holding his hand. And everybody agreed that Kaiser Wilhelm II acted like a perfect gentleman, and there was no cause to critique him. And I think the critiques came later when Edward VII decided by himself and silently that the confrontation with Germany, that was the thing to do. And he worked to bring it about. And this is what caused him to just to badmouth the Kaiser for various things and things that the Kaiser did not approve. But I mean, Queen Victoria, of course, they were all Germans. I mean, all the rulers of Europe were all descended from German families, so they were all family, which apparently did not prevent them from fighting each other and going to war. And Kaiser Wilhelm did not deserve the bad reputation that he had. He did not deserve it. He got that reputation from the bad mouthing by Edward VII.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting that Carol quickly doesn't list Edward VII as being a member of the Milner Group, but he makes it very clear that the King's close friend and associate and advisor, Eminence Grise, Lord Esher, Reginald Balliol Brett, was at the very heart of the secret society. And Esher, one of the crucial things is when we start thinking, heading towards planning for the war, was that they set up the Committee for Imperial Defence in 1904 to start planning the war. It was going on for at least a decade before Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot, and they knew that this Committee for Imperial Defence would have a huge role to play in not only planning Britain's preparations, setting up Britain's preparations for the forthcoming war, but the rest of Europe as well, and the crucial thing about the King and this Lord Esher was the chairman of the Committee for Imperial Defence, and he was writing to the King daily, or actually going along to Buckingham Palace for meetings with him and on a daily basis. So the King was right in there at the very heart of this planning, and he played him, as Peter has shown in his book, Two Edwards. He was very played a huge part. The King played a huge part in setting up the alliances that were necessary for taking on Germany, for surrounding Germany. He set up the special relationship, or he played a huge part in setting up the special relationship. Rhodes had said that Britain probably could never do this on their own. They would need to bring the United States back into the fold, and the King made it clear he was a constitutional monarch and not supposed to have any political role in Britain. But he decided he was going to play the part of the de facto British Foreign Secretary, and he set up. He contacted as soon as Roosevelt came in to the White House. He was writing to him through trusted intermediaries, and it was on a basis sort of senior Masonic figure. The king was head of the Masonic order in Britain. And then when he was Prince of Wales, and then when he became the king, he was some fancy title, protector of the order, Masonic order. And so these two guys were close, and the Brotherhood, the Masonic Brotherhood, and Roosevelt said immediately, yes, all we need to do is change this from English control of the world as set out in Rose's first will to Anglo-American control. And that's what they did. They brought America in. And so the king was instrumental in setting up the special relationship with America, which was obviously hugely important later on for funding the war, First World War and the Second World War. And then in 1903, he was instrumental in setting up the Entente Cordiale with France, which was actually signed and agreed in 1904. And then he was instrumental in bringing Russia into the fold as well, so that Germany was going to be surrounded by a ring of steel, the proverbial ring of steel. That would be France, Russia, or Britain, when the time came, America. But a lot of historians don't mention the fact that he was also instrumental to a large extent in bringing, being involved in the Belgian question, because that was going to be the reason that Britain got into the First World War, was because Germany had crossed neutral Belgium, and Britain said, get out of Belgium, or we're going to declare war on you. And the Germans, of course, they couldn't. Through Belgium to get to France was one of their only slight chances they could have winning the war, so they couldn't do that. But in actual fact, Belgian neutrality was a sham, and it had been a sham for a very long time. The treaty had been set up in, I think it was 1823, the Treaty of London, saying that all the nations signed it, the European nations signed it, guaranteeing Belgian neutrality. But from 1906, with like the Russian royal family, the British royal family was deeply involved through marriage with the Belgian royal family, King Leopold, and so the king arranged for British Army and British intelligence to spend a lot of time in Belgium from 1906 onwards, and they were actually planning everything down in very, very fine detail, that how they were going to try and thwart the Schlieffen Plan as the German forces came through Belgium, and so the king was involved in that, deeply involved in that as well, and I think that's an important point, because that takes us on to the next stages for the next conversation of next podcast.
There you go. Setting us up for the continuation of the discussion here. We guys, we're already at 90 minutes. Okay. And there's so much in this episode to unpack here. But what I want to do, though, because I know we could just go on and on forever, is I want to give everybody here the opportunity to have a final word, final say, final just piece of nugget of information or wisdom that you want to pass on to the audience to go chew on and digest, either a continuation of what we've discussed here or just something, any parting words that you want to leave to the audience. So I'm basically just going to go around and just call on you guys and just let you have the last say, and that'll probably take us up to the end. So let's start off with Professor Preparata. What are your final thoughts here?
Final thoughts. I like this the reflection on Quigley, and maybe let's all check out his interview and keep thinking about the personal struggle of these once faithful gatekeepers who kind of leaked things.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'll go listen to that too, as maybe that'll be our homework for this week. Everybody out there, go listen to the Quigley interview, and awesome. And then maybe we can discuss next week. So,
and if I could just jump in here, Tim. Here, I don't know if my camera's up or how I'll
go for it, Tim.
Going, but I just did want to ask, listening to ideas that religion played such a crucial part in furthering this conflict. And in one part, I believe that it's of the sort of early chapters of Two World Wars and Hitler, one of the high government officials talked about how the recruitment from the pulpit and the call for volunteers in Britain did more to bring in soldiers to the slaughter than any other military recruitment campaign could have ever done. And it did make me think that between the religious fervor and the media, the complicity of the media in either encouraging or being silent about the truths, is something that we continue to experience to this day. And what role the media plays or chooses to remain silent on, I think continues to be a critical driver that we should try to follow, both in what is said as well as their silence. It really impressed me, this observation of this panel on the connection between all the different facets of society and how real big money can pull them all together and make them do their bidding.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Tim. Very astute. Very astute. Let's see. So, Peter Hoff, you want to give us some final thoughts
Final thoughts. Well, the World War One was, of course, it was sad and pointless, and was made especially sad because of the Kiel celebrations that happened just before the war, when Germany and Britain were getting along just fine, and British sailors were chasing German girls, and God was in heaven, and everything was fine. When everybody got the news about the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand. And then what followed 4 years later is what's just so pointless. And you read these campaigns by the French, by the British generals, John French and Douglas Haig, leading young British boys against German machine gun nests. And it's just so awful what happened. It's just so awful what happened, and that's my final word.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it truly is. Truly is. Mr. Terry Boardman. Final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I think it was Tim just mentioned the role of the media, and you probably remember back in 2014 when we had the centennial remembering of 1914. And the media here in Britain, for example, it was just, well, it was pretty depressing actually to see the extent to which the mainstream media just trotted out the same things as they'd basically essentially said 100 years before. Nevertheless, it was also interesting to observe that around that time, a lot of dissident voices were speaking up. Guido's book, of course, had already appeared in 2005, but around 2015, a number of really positive and helpful books appeared. And one of those, for those of in the English-speaking world, was this one, The Darkest Days. Can you see that? You see that okay, Scott? Yeah?
Yep,
The
got you.
Darkest
Yep.
Days by Douglas Newton, which Jim and John referred to in their book. And this is a really superb study, I think, of the last week and the machinations of the British cabinet, and the machinations in particular Winston Churchill, who was recently picked up by American blogger and historian Darrell Cooper in a conversation with Tucker Carlson, where Darrell Cooper pointed out Churchill's responsibility for World War II, prime responsibility. And of course, Churchill was the only member of the British cabinet who had been in these pole positions in the cabinets in both world wars, the only member of the British cabinet. And he was furthermore, he was in the same position as well. He was in charge of Britain's major military arm, which is, of course, the Navy. So what he did in that week before Britain declared war. And when Britain declared war, it became a world war. That was the significance, right? So it's really excellent what's Doug, kind of blow by blow, almost hour by hour account of what was happening in Britain, which led up to this incredible cabinet meeting of the 2nd of August, which I wish somebody would make a movie of because it would be really tremendous. But anyway, that's a remarkable book, and others came around about the same time. So I take heart from that no matter how much these secret societies or these dark figures try to suppress the truth, it always comes out. The truth will always come out. And I think we should always take heart from that and continue on in that vein. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. And Matt Arid, any final thoughts here?
Yeah. This was really great. We should have more conversations like this. I guess just share a couple of if I don't share this now, I'm gonna forget. So I'll just put this out there based on what had just been mentioned about Edward. I just want to throw this out there to tie this into the present circumstance that we're living in right now in world history. We are living in history after all, and these are the consequences of a lot of very toxic ideas that have been permitted to shape policy unchallenged over too many generations. So now we're sort of paying the consequence of ignoring these things. So one thing that I noted in looking at Edward VII was especially his role, his passion. He had a big tattoo on his chest of the Kingdom of Jerusalem tattoo. And he did that when he went to Jerusalem in 1861 as the first sort of royal monarch since Richard the Lionheart, who had set foot in the Holy Land. And his passion was really the restoration of the Kingdom of Jerusalem that had sort of animated the passions of a lot of useful idiots who went into forever war games for a few centuries during the Crusades. So you got that factor behind it too, and he was also the patron of Sir Walter Besant, the brother-in-law of Annie Besant, who is the head of the Theosophists after Blavatsky had died. So one thing to note about that is that Walter Besant and Edward VII were also the heads of the Quatuor Coronati Lodge, which was the first research lodge of the United Grand Lodge of Freemasonry that the king also headed. So this guy was a grand strategist. He wasn't just like a figurehead. And I like the fact that you pointed out that it was a lot of his profiling and his networking that was able to create the conditions around which World War II could then be kind of, set into motion. The other thing, too, about this is that Lord Milner was one of the co-authors of the Balfour Accords. It wasn't just Lord Balfour. Lord Milner was one of the 4 authors of it. And these guys did the Roundtable movement itself was premised around a certain romantic notion of the Grail myths, which served, from Eleanor Aquitaine and onward as sort of a recruitment tool to get people to find talent who would want to be part of an initiated class of holy warriors who would be initiated into the Templars and into these other chivalric orders that would then oversee the sending of so-called Christian warriors off to go and fight heretics in the Holy Land to recapture that thing. But they also wanted to rebuild Solomon's Temple. That was a big thing of the Templars. That was one of their commitments. Albert Pike talks about the Templar commitment to rebuild Solomon's Temple. That's where their headquarters were located. That was one of the big fascinations with Sir Charles Warren and Walter Besant and Edward VII was the recreation of Solomon's Temple. In their mind, this would be some sort of an eschatological sort of invocation ritual that would bring in a reset of civilization into some weird fantasy that they wanted to usher in. I think they see Solomon's Temple kind of like, they don't see it the way most Christians who read the Bible see it. They see it more as a place where you had at different times, mass human sacrifice, the worshiping of Moloch, which was a deity figure that demanded child sacrifice in ancient times. It's all over the Old Testament, little references to that. And so I think they actually have an idea of reconstructing Solomon's Temple with an idea that was an ancient pagan central command center for very brutalizing, profane rituals that they want to sort of normalize again. And I think the fact that you have in our current world, I'm sure everyone's noticed that the Greater Israel Project has been launched. I mean, it's been launched a few generations ago, but it's entering a new phase of activity. There's a big fetish amongst certain people who really want to, prepare for a sacrifice of holy red cows to prepare to bring him, to reconstruct Solomon's temple. That's a thing. They seem to want to do it right on a holy site that the Muslims think is, one of the holiest sites in the world. They can't do it beside it. They have to do it right there. So that's another thing. So that's like a recipe for a really bad conflagration that could be really traumatic for humanity. So these are all like things that I think tie into the sort of roundtable thing. This, it's not just one geopolitical thing. It has multiple aspects to it. And I think all of it has to be thought together as one thing, which also ties in. And I won't say anything about this, but it does tie in very. If people want to understand the essence of it, read John Ruskin and his Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and their ideals. It kind of gets you into the heart and soul of what they want to do. So I do think that that's useful as well. So those are just my considerations, and I want to thank you guys just for setting this roundtable up. It's a lot of fun, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah,
Pete Hegseth has the same tattoo, right?
Who?
Kingdom of Jerusalem. Pete Hegseth has the same tattoo on his chest.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And he gave speeches calling for his devotion to rebuild Solomon's temple in Jerusalem 4 times in the last 5 years. So, yep, those are things.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So many people think that like the Israel Palestine Gaza conflict started on October 7th, but we have to go a lot further back to get any sort of context or understanding around that. And so, it's conversations like this that really help elucidate that and drive the conversation in a meaningful direction so that people actually can have informed opinions about such things. So we want to kick it over to the two authors and Dr. O'Dowd. What are your final thoughts today? And
well, this whole thing's been fascinating, this whole discussion. And what it's the message I take away from this is how the facts of history reverberate down the generations and how we can feel those echoes even right down to today, and how constant the themes are about how the same groups of people operate, how they establish their ideas and how they disseminate them, and how they recruit willing recruits to do their bidding, and the methods they use, and how religion is used, the media are used. These things might change, but the constant is the methodology and the echoes of that methodology down generations. And that's been exposed by this discussion. And incidentally, I do remember watching the Quigley interview many years ago. I'm going to look at it again because I think I'll bring new eyes and ears to that thanks to the discussion here, Terry and others. So it's been great. Thanks.
awesome. Thank you so much, John. And then Dr. MacGregor, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with John. It's been quite fascinating listening to you guys, and I think it would be a shame for me to leave tonight without jumping on my usual hobby horse about the creation of fake history. And it's something we never brought up. We're talking about quickly that maybe for some people looking in who are not au fait with his work, that he stated quite categorically that these elites, this secret society, this Milner group, whatever we like to call them, the men behind the curtain, the power oligarchs, the money power, whatever we want to call them, they had generated a triple front penetration, as he called it, which I thought was a great term. And it was a triple front penetration of politics, journalism, and education. And through the penetration of education, and they did that largely in England, at least, was through Oxford University, Balliol College and All Souls College in particular, and building on the work of Ruskin, as we've discussed earlier. And through this control of education, they controlled the writing and the teaching of history. And Quigley states this clearly. It's not something he's equivocal about in this. They controlled the writing and the teaching of history. And basically, whoever controls the writing of history controls the future. And unless we can wrest the control of history away from them, then they will continue their power. That's what I would like the message to leave with tonight.
That's
If
awesome.
I could just jump in at the very end here, Jim, and say that I think you're absolutely correct. And the great antidote to that control is what Scott and Chris and Richard Grove all bring, is that this is the finest use of technology. The idea that we are independent voices, and through the independent published word, we can counter that control in a way that was never possible before. And it should give us tremendous hope going forward.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Amen.
Yeah, that's perfect. So, Mr. Milligan, founder, publisher, TrineDay Studios. What are your final thoughts here?
Thank you all for, this time and your thoughts, because, I've put on conferences before and there are people there and everybody's read each other's book and stuff like that. But when you get the people together and talking, you advance our understandings because all of us bring something to the table. Okay. So I really appreciate you guys coming to this round table. Okay. And it is up to us, okay, to move history forward in the way that we want it to. Okay. And all it takes is you have to stand up and be yourself and try and create a better world, because what else are we doing down here? I mean, we're on this one little blue ball floating through space, or actually spinning through space. And, we have to share this blue ball with other people. And, there's been many people that have told us, hey, you got to treat your brothers and sisters like your brothers and sisters. And if we can do that and, understand the perfidy that has been done to us, okay, and understand how these people, get us into little camps throwing balls back and forth at each other, okay. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you, Jim and John, for this great book, Two World Wars and Hitler, that helps me to understand the world that we live in, and onwards to a better future for our children.
Yeah, that's what we're all trying to do here. So the work that each one of you have done over the years have coalesced into better understandings in your own communities, and now we're just trying to aggregate that information, perpetuate this the solution forward, and just help people reach better understanding. So I really want to again reiterate what Chris was saying, just thank each one of you for being here today. I know your time is very valuable, so coming here and spending this time with us discussing the book is incredible. If you guys want, of course, if you're watching this, listening to this podcast out there, make sure you get a copy, Two World Wars and Hitler, Who Was Responsible, okay? And you can get that at TrineDay.com. Go to TrineDay.com. Make sure that you get your own copy. You can follow along as we go through the chapters going forward here. And very excited for continuing this conversation next time. And so thanks again for everybody for joining us. And once again, my name is Scott Armstrong, and this is the TrineDay Studio Sessions podcast, and we'll see you next time. Peace.